Welcome to the Genetic Alliance webinar on privacy and access. We're very delighted today to be able to talk about balancing privacy and access. This is Sharon Terry. I'm President and CEO of Genetic Alliance. We've spent quite a number of years looking at how consumers can interact with their own information, both their usual clinical information, medical information, as well as participating in clinical trials. Many of the disease advocacy organizations have spent a lot of time on this issue as well, and Genetic Alliance itself has spent many, many years building a Genetic Alliance biobank, which allows the storage of samples and clinical information for epidemiological and clinical studies. One of the major pieces missing in this entire equation for a very long time was how do we give consumers more control, since that's certainly the way things are moving, as well as how do we make sure that we're complying with state and federal laws, with all of the IRB and HIPAA requirements, etc., and the complexity around that. Today we're really fortunate to have with us Robert Shelton and Mark Kirschbaum, both of Private Access, a company that Genetic Alliance is working with very closely. We are engaging in a very novel partnership in a public-private kind of venture with Private Access, looking at how can we increase the capacity of our community, and by that we certainly mean all the disease advocacy organizations as well as the clinical endeavors and the research endeavors that we are interfacing with. So I'm going to turn the webinar over first to Robert Shelton. Robert and Mark will each introduce themselves as they begin their portions. So Robert, take it away.
Thanks, Sharon. So Mark and I are going to present this in somewhat of a tag team kind of a approach. So Mark, you want to speak up so they understand your voice versus mine?
Sure. This is Mark Kirschbaum speaking.
So what we thought we would try to do is to describe who is Private Access, why is there a need for this application, and basically the topics that you're seeing on the agenda, and ultimately focusing on speculating on the possibility of creating some projects together and answering any questions and discussion. Just to give you an introduction to both Mark and myself, I've been involved in the health IT space, the information technology space, for about 17 years. I came up with the idea of having something called privacy-enabled search, which we'll get to in a while, based upon playing with the AltaVista search engine and thinking that it would be a wonderful tool to use for internet-based search to locate medical documents and to empower people to have data liquidity, but that it required patient privacy in order to be effective. And I filed several patent applications around that idea in approximately 1997, and while the patent was pending, which it was pending for 8.5 years, while it was pending, my wife and I became pregnant, and or she became pregnant, I guess I should say, and our son was prenatally diagnosed at 19 weeks with a rare genetic condition. And that ultimately led me to becoming the chairman of a 5,500-member disease advocacy group called KSNA, which actually, for privacy reasons, stands for Knowledge, Support, and Action. But it, before that, stood for Klinefelter Syndrome and Associates, because many of our members did not want their letters in their mailboxes to include the name of the condition on the outside of the envelope. We repurposed the acronym to being something that could appear on the outside of the envelope, even though the interior of it was specific to the condition of Klinefelter's. So that brought me to a perception of how the tools that I'd conceived of several years before could be really applied in the disease advocacy world, and in the focus of expediting research and hopefully having some breakthroughs occur faster and with less cost, which led to the founding, after we got the patent, to clear the patent office and issue in late 2006, led to the formation of Private Access. So that's sort of just to let you know that privacy is not a new conception. The second line of the patent reads that the central premise of the system is that it prevents or provides the fundamental right for confidentiality of the records based upon the patient having control as to which parties receive those records. So with that, I'm going to sort of turn over to Mark, and perhaps Mark, why don't you run through your background similarly?
Sure, I'll do this briefly. And I joined Robert a little more than a year ago when we realized we had a great opportunity to blend our two sets of experiences and capabilities. I've spent more than a decade focused on technology, information management, and security, including having been president of Experian's fraud and identity solutions business, and having seen how data liquidity created a marketplace around financial services. It was just a natural progression for me to look at it and say, how can that same data liquidity benefit the healthcare community looking at health information? And so it was quite, I guess, part design, part serendipity that Robert and I connected through a mutual mentor, and it has been a wonderful opportunity since then over the past year as we have focused millions of dollars and many, many thousands of hours of energy to begin to build out the solutions that will create true data liquidity based upon individual privacy preferences and patient consent.
The two of us are supported by what we consider a world-class advisory board. The names are you can read as I'll just touch on a couple. Lee Jones was the first person I called after the patent issued. He was the Chief Technology Officer for the Office of the National Coordinator, which was in charge of the health data exchange for the United States government, for all of us in the country. I approached him and asked him if he could disavow me of the idea about privacy and the way that we were approaching the controls, and ultimately he thought that it was a great idea and joined us as our interim Chief Technology Officer, and so a lot of the design that you're going to see is from him. We have the former CIO of United Healthcare, the former president of Serum International, head of clinical research for Pfizer, one of the foremost experts in computer security, who's now running the enterprise division of McAfee, one of the earliest people, and Alan Weston, one of the earliest people who's written textbooks on privacy in a free society. And we have just a great wealth of people that are associated with us that are resources as we've been developing this technology. In many ways, my mentor in all of this is Sharon, and I don't know, Sharon, if you're still on the call. I think most people know you, but I was
thinking, I am.
Because everybody, I think most everybody on the call knows you. I thought I was going to initially pull this slide out of the deck, but you're just too important to the way that we view going forward in this. So if you know, you've probably looked at the list of who are the participants. You want to summarize your background a little bit?
Sure, and most people are somewhat familiar with me, so I came to this very much like Robert did as the mother and so a father of two kids with a genetic disease. And as most of you know, I'm president and CEO here now of Genetic Alliance, really working how can we make solutions for systems connect better, how can we transform the universe of translating research to services and all the steps in between. And my passion is building these kinds of systems. So what you're going to see today, private access, really excites me because right now it's the quintessential example of how do we bring all the good stuff together in a way that really rolls and makes sense out of both the business side as well as the science side of this endeavor.
So just jumping in from there, this is an old slide. We actually were using this about a year ago to say that there's this conundrum that exists historically between the aspect of the desire to maintain privacy and on the other side the desire to provide access to information in order to improve care, expedite research, and contain cost. And so there's a legal thicket that exists by virtue of this. There's a public relations and a policy-related thicket that exists because of this, and there's technology problems that exist because of this. And so this was our slide sort of juxtaposing the desire to maintain privacy with the desire to provide better access to information. We actually have now sort of transformed this into a little bit different perspective based in part by the campaigns that just recently ended. This is the campaign promise from the Obama administration, or the Obama campaign, that was part of their promise for how they approached healthcare. And on these two issues, the providing access to electronic information and safeguarding the right to privacy, the McCain campaign actually had a very similar set of campaign promises. This is, I'm actually been at HIMSS, the Health Information Management Society conference, for the last 4.5 days, and one of the points that was made in one of the early plenary sessions was the one issue that both sides of the aisle seem to agree on is that if we're going to really solve the problems in the healthcare challenges in our country, we need electronic information and better accessibility of that information. And if we're going to get patients to go along with that, we need a way to safeguard their right to privacy as we're doing it. And so that campaign promise has sort of now been manifest into a national health care agenda. It was for the ARRA economic stimulus package passed. When the stimulus package was adopted, it actually contained almost 50 pages actually more than 50 pages of policy related to privacy, in addition to the billions of dollars that are there for health information exchange and to expedite electronic records. And so there's now developed a dialogue about how to accomplish that, and many of the vendors at this conference I'm attending are focused on that issue and needing to come up with that solution in order to allow the pipes that create the connectivity to function with liquidity. We actually participated in this dialogue that occurred before the campaign was over, where they were looking to make a recommendation from the National Academy of Public Administration on how to expand the information technology and simultaneously protect privacy. And we submitted our Privacy and Access in Perfect Balance, to which the National Academy responded back that what they heard us advocating was a true synthesis of access and privacy that could be achieved through enhanced technology. So what we're going to show you is that technology in both how it works and the application for a research focus. We are focused in our immediate implementation on these 4 tools. The first one we call Privacy Layer is an enabling technology that allows individuals to control their privacy preferences and who can see their information, who cannot see their information, the rules under which it can be shared or withheld. Then on top of that layer, we apply for clinical trials recruitment purposes 2 applications, Trials Finder, which is really oriented towards disease advocacy groups and providers and other people who serve as gatekeepers to various patient populations, as well as RecruitSource, which is a web-based tool for researchers to locate subjects for clinical trials pursuant to the consents that have been given by the patients to be locatable. And then we're moving in the direction of our next application, which is focused on sharing medical records, called Records Agent, which we'll touch on briefly at the end. If we think about the technology that enables many of us to function many times a day in terms of finding documents, finding people, finding opportunities, finding restaurants, finding movies, we think of search engines. So the architecture behind a search engine is that, such as Google, there's others, but such as Google, is that there's a public record seeker who is looking through a search algorithm, which is in this case the page ranking system, at an index of index data that allows them to locate in a searchable, organized fashion the public information that's out on the web servers of various organizations and companies. And that information comes across extremely quickly, and it's advertising supported, and I assume most of the people, if not all the people on this call, use this technology daily in their activities. When we try to use this same technology or look at using the same technology, which is incredibly efficient for private information instead of public, it's a woefully inadequate technology. It doesn't protect privacy. And so what we've conceived of and built, this will be a multi-year build to get full build out, but what we've built first generation of is what we call a privacy rights filter that sits between the search algorithm and the record seeker. And that rights filter we call privacy layer, and it contains 4 pieces. The first piece at the front end of it is an independent identity verification, because to find private information, a public record seeker is no longer satisfactory. It needs to be an authenticated record seeker, because ultimately it's going to be a permissioned record seeker. And so the first piece of privacy layer is to have the independent identity verification. The next piece, the thicker bar here, has 2 pieces. The first part of it is the patient's privacy directives, who can and cannot see their information, the circumstances under which that information can be used, the privacy directives for each of their individual information, their confidential information contained in the private documents. Those directives we put into a database that is a database for authorization and for consent, and for consent management, for dynamic reconsent after the fact, if the further consents are required. That, though, is only a part of the equation. The other half of it is that there needs to be the authority by which that consent is employed. So there's applicable laws by states and federal government. There's also the forms that the various places where the records are held may require different forms in one hospital versus another doctor's office. So that the consent marries with the authority in this middle layer to permit the flow of that information. But then the next layer, the third piece to this, is that there needs to be a comprehensive audit log. So the audit log needs to contain information about who's accessing the records, who's given permissions, the identity verification, and the applicable law that was relied upon, or the consent that was relied upon to permit the activity flow to occur. And the last piece is the billings equation to allow transaction-based billing and payments to take place through the privacy layer. So for any activity going through it, if there's a charge associated with that activity, we've built a technology for that billing and transaction-based billing and payment service to occur. And I was a couple of days ago talking to someone here at the conference, and I was saying that when I first got involved in websites and built an e-commerce website in 1997, we had a $100,000 budget, and about $65,000 out of the $100,000 was focused on building the shopping cart technology to allow the consumer to enter their credit card information and to transact using the website. So today, if we want to add shopping cart technology to a website, we could do it. We could set it up during the duration of this call through PayPal and have it done for $75 plus a small percentage of the credit card charges using that capability. So what's happened is we've made the shopping cart technology into a utility that is available for everyone. And the idea of privacy rights filter, or the privacy rights filter and privacy layer, is to do the same thing, to make it a utility so that each holder of information, each seeker of information, does not have to build their own. They can use the utility and get the economy of scale of lots of people using a single technology. So that's sort of the background for what exists, and with that we believe we can transact the capability of locating records that are confidential records through the browser and the basic technologies we're very familiar with. So as we move from concept and building technology to an application for it, the first application we focused on, which is for recruitment for clinical trials, and we call that RecruitSource. And so rather than talk about it, we thought that we would demo it for you. But let me first give you sort of the objectives here. If we try to find a local or a public figure using Google or another search engine. So the example that's here is we were trying to find, we had a hypothetical party we wanted to hold, and we wanted to find the original drummer for the Beatles and invite them to be our entertainment at the party. It took us under 2 minutes to not only locate the person, which was in this case Pete Best, but we didn't know that when we started. We didn't use his name. We just said original drummer Beatles, found him. From there, found a website. From there, found a contact name. And in under 2 minutes, we were able to send him an email and ask him to, in theory, be part of our entertainment. Similarly, there's a technology for locating people for dating or people for employees in Monster.com or Match.com, and we've run a lot of tests through those, and in under 3 minutes we're able to locate people that match our criteria for our interests. So when we turn to locating a patient and patient information, we find that today's technology results in taking those few minutes that are required using the Internet for the power of the Internet and makes it into days, weeks, months, and of time, which has a cost in terms of dollars. It also has a cost in terms of lives and slowing down the breakthroughs associated with medical breakthroughs. And so it's a very manual process, very cost-intensive and time-intensive process. RecruitSource is designed in order to make that stroke shorter. So Mark, why don't you demo what I've been conceptually talking about?
Thanks. The first application, as Robert said, was around RecruitSource and how we are leveraging the technology around privacy preferences and access to data to transform clinical trials, patient recruitment, and awareness of clinical trials. And this is the beginning and the genesis of our partnership, a very exciting partnership with Genetic Alliance. It's based upon 3 web-based applications that make up the transformation of clinical trials recruitment using private access as tools. I am connected now to our servers back in California, and so I will be showing you this technology and how it works. The first is Trials Finder, which is a tool, as Robert described, to be used by disease advocacy groups or others to identify clinical trials and using Web 2.0 widget technology populate the widget on websites, on chat rooms, on e-newsletters and emails and elsewhere to make their members aware and easily able to participate in trials. The second is Privacy Layer, where the individual is then prompted to set their privacy preferences, as Robert described, and determine with whom they're willing to share what information they're willing to share as well. And RecruitSource is the tool used by researchers, which is the search engine with an authenticated record seeker coming in and looking for information. And I will show you how this works. I'm skipping over the Trials Finder piece for right now as to how the buttons are created, and I'm going straight to the KSNA website, where one could be looking for information on a clinical trial. When searching through the website or on the home page, the opportunities are presented to participate either in a specific clinical trial or for research in general. Here's a description of a real clinical trial being conducted by Dr. Jay Geed at the NIH around brain imaging. It is a plain English description of the trial so that individuals can understand it. And using the Trials Finder tool, the advocacy group will have placed the I'm interested button, which they can have say whatever they want and look as they want, next to the description of the trial. So it is easy for the individual to raise their hand and say, I'm interested. When I click on the I'm interested button, I'm now taken to a co-branded website between KSNA, the organization, and Private Access, which is Privacy Layer, where the individual begins to set their privacy preferences. And so here is the co-branded page. We really believe that a large part of privacy and the success of privacy is around trust. And individuals truly trust their medical providers, their doctors, as well as the organizations where people who have conditions like theirs are located. So you see Robert here presented because our widget knew that they came in from KSNA. And so Robert, being a trusted individual within that organization, is going to guide them through the process of first establishing their privacy preferences, and then sharing their personal information that could then be searched and found by researchers looking for subjects. I can simply sign up to protect my privacy here on Privacy Layer and create my accounts in a quick manner. And I also already have an account for an individual named Chris Briggs. So I'm going to log in as Chris, indicating my interest in the brain imaging trial being conducted by Dr. Jay Geed. You'll see here Chris already has an account with information. There's also an opportunity for Chris to add another family member, say it's a child that is actually the individual for this clinical trial or for the preferences that are being set. In this case, I will select Chris, and I will be then taken to by Robert again as my guide to walk me through establishing my privacy preferences. Rather than answering a bunch of legal questions, our approach is to select a guide, which are individuals known to the members of the organization that they might trust or believe would have similar views as they would. So if the individual chooses to select Robert as their guide, remember they have an interest in the trial, but the first priority is to set their privacy preferences. They can follow Robert as their guide and set their privacy preferences. One of the things that's unique here is the individual's not just raising their hand or trying to get connected to a particular trial. Rather, what they're doing is now setting privacy preferences for not just Dr. Geed, but all KSNA researchers as well as all researchers in general. And Robert here in this testimonial gives 3 different options to the individual for setting privacy preferences. Faster access to studies, which is the least restrictive, hence the more amount of green, with respect to allowing researchers to see their anonymous medical information, as well as whether they can have their contact information directly or whether express consent will be required. As we move to the more conservative sides of the privacy settings, you can see red has jumped in here, which means that if this is your view, then all researchers would never have access. It would be limited to KSNA researchers and Dr. Geed. And then the most restrictive recommendations that Robert provides would even require that while Dr. Geed can see your anonymous records, or my anonymous records as Chris Briggs, even Dr. Geed would need my express consent to make contact with me. This is beginning to fill out what we call the health universe of privacy preferences, and the first implementation is around researchers and whether they can see your information. I can manually customize these as well from drop-down menus, or I can choose to continue and confirm that these are the privacy settings that I want with respect to researchers. Now that I've completed my privacy preferences, I'm guided to now begin to share my healthcare information. In this example, it is information that is completed by a questionnaire by the patient. It can also be used to connect other places where one might have information. If they have a tissue sample in a biobank, that information can be connected here. If they have a doctor's office with medical information, that information can be connected as well. In this case, we go to the health questionnaire, which is built on 2 layers. The first layer is primarily generic information about the individual, for which Chris has already completed, as well as some information on his conditions. The second level of the questionnaire is specific to those conditions which Chris indicates that he has, as well as the fact that we know that he came from the KSNA website. So he is completing questions that would be used by someone who's doing research around Klinefelter syndrome as inclusion and exclusion criteria. So here's Chris's contact information. Here's his medical information. If he wants to, he can use free text to add another condition. Say he says that he has diabetes. He can add diabetes to medical conditions, and you see it gets added down here. If I decide to take something out, say I take depression out, it's no longer here. If I decide I want to add, well, I also take acetaminophen, which, by the way, when the researcher is searching, our database knows that acetaminophen is synonymous with Tylenol, and so that it would find either one. And so you can get the idea of how this information gets added. When I click Continue, I'm now taken to the second layer of the questionnaire, which is the detailed health questionnaire coming from the Klinefelter organization based on what they know researchers are looking for. When I click Continue, this then takes me to the questionnaire and I'm asked those specific questions. I begin to answer these questions at what time in your life or what circumstances led to your diagnosis. Were you ever given testosterone? Again, you get the idea. I'll stop the questionnaire for now, which you can stop at any time because you get the idea of the information that's collected. That information is now all searchable by a researcher based upon the privacy preferences. And now Chris Briggs has done everything he needs to make himself available to Jay Geed. I now come over to RecruitSource, logged in as Jay Geed already, as Robert said, the authenticated record seeker, and I begin to look for, in this case, for my clinical trial, individuals who might have Klinefelter syndrome. So now I'm going to search the database to see if there are any individuals who have Klinefelters. And based upon our, it timed me out here. So let me log back in.
I'll occupy the white space by saying we've paid particular attention to the security of all these systems. So a lot of the systems you're seeing with these images like the swan and the frog, those are site keys like they're used on banking websites. Because if we don't have good security around this, then the privacy preferences fall to the minimum, the lowest common denominator of the absence of security. So we build very tight security around what we're doing.
Thanks. So now you can see that there are 4 subjects who meet my search criteria just for Klinefelters. What I can do here as a researcher is view all of the information the patient is willing to share before I've even incurred any expenses or had to do any mass marketing to try to screen individuals. I can click on more details, and as much information as was completed is here. One might look particularly familiar to you because you can see here the addition of acetaminophen and diabetes as part of these conditions, but we only know that because I'm working both sides of it and showing it to you. I can refine my search if I want to and say, okay, well, what if I'm only looking for individuals as a researcher between 20 and 49, and I know that people are not willing to travel and I'm not going to pay for it, so they better be within 50 miles of where I'm doing my study in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, what happens if I refine my search based upon these more limited restrictions? And you'll see now that here's the one individual that meets my search criteria. I now can also save my search as an alert, very similar to Google or other tools that create a search alert. And now I can say, I'm going to save this as sample search, and if anyone else enters the database going forward who meets my search criteria, I'm going to get a daily notification that there are new individuals who might qualify for my trial via email alerts. Now when I choose, I can either bookmark this candidate or I can choose to make contact. When I choose to make contact, if you remember, the privacy preference set by Chris Briggs was that he had to have that the researcher needed my express consent. So I indicate which of my trials I'm linked to for which I want to make contact. I agree to honor the privacy preferences and compensate private access once I get the contact information. And when I agree to that, I have done everything I need to do as the researcher to send an email notification to Chris Briggs saying that there's an opportunity waiting for his attention.
Hey, Mark, somebody just asked, so can you change the level of privacy once you've created a level of privacy?
Thanks for asking, and the answer is absolutely. The individual patient can go into privacy layer at any time and view their profile and make changes as they wish to their privacy settings. And also, right now, when I now come in and I've gotten that email telling me that there's an opportunity awaiting my attention, you'll see now that I have one privacy alert here. And when I now change it and give Jay Geed permission to see my contact info, I actually am changing my privacy preferences. So the email would link directly to this site, to this URL, which shows the privacy layer once Chris Briggs is logged in, that there's a research opportunity requiring his attention. And here you can see Jay Geed wants Chris Briggs' contact information for a particular trial. Here's the name of it. Chris can view the details and understand more as to why Jay Geed wants to contact him. You can see how this can be translated to any request for a patient's records where they'd indicate why they want those records. and now I modify my privacy preferences, as you were asking, Sharon, by consenting to this. I am now agreeing to give Jay Geed my contact information. Now you'll see this is dropped out of my box, and if I come back to Jay Geed, and Jay Geed goes to his contacts, because he would have gotten an email saying that he now has a new individual with whom to make contact, he can see the status is now consent granted, and it changed over the last 40 seconds or so from pending consent to consent granted in the log. And now when Jay Geed clicks on the candidate's pseudo-anonymized name here, it actually translates into Chris Briggs because the privacy directive has been changed. I can download this to my address book. When I close it out, the page gets updated, and now Chris Briggs' contact info is here. The last piece I'll mention, and what I'm highlighting, are all of the components of that architecture that Robert mentioned, from the authenticated record seeker now through the audit log, so that when I come into my toolbox as Chris Briggs, I'm able to go to my audit log and see everything that has been done around my privacy settings and my information. So this is West Coast time in California, 9:32 a.m. Logged into the system as Chris Briggs, and then at 9:42, contact was made by Jay Geed, who viewed Chris Briggs' contact information. Consent was granted a mere 31 seconds before that, and all of the directives were set about 5 or 7 minutes before that. And so this audit log is very important from a HIPAA compliance perspective, as well as from a patient confidence that they can monitor and know exactly who has seen their information and for what purposes. So with that, I will hand it back to Robert.
Yep, we're working on that. And while we're working on it, I'll just give you an update on the questions we have. One is, does the researcher pay for the ability to contact the potential trial participant? And then the other is, do you find the researcher or manufacturer are initiating the trial in RecruitSource and then working with the advocacy organization to encourage the patients to join?
I didn't quite understand the second question, but let me answer the first, and then we'll go to the second.
Actually, I can answer the second, so go ahead.
Okay, so I'll do the first, you take the second. The answer to the first one is yes, the researcher is asked to compensate private access as a means of the income flow through RecruitSource for the contact information, and then a portion of their payment is shared with the gatekeeper, in this case the disease advocacy group, as a portion of the ability for them to set up the organization associated with creating the websites and the announcing clinical trials that they think are of interest, will be of interest to their membership. We are presently estimating, there's some statistics about what the cost is for locating subjects for clinical trials. Our pricing is based upon dropping that price by a factor of 10, so we're actually reducing the researchers' cost to 1/10 of what they're presently expending in terms of locating people for trials, and we hope that we're giving them better information and better tools to do it faster and with better precision. But the pricing in this manner allows us to provide to the organization that's the gatekeeper free of charge all of the tools, and to provide to the patients the privacy layer capabilities free of charge. So our perception is that that's the proper place to locate the payment structures.
Great. And the other question one of the other questions we've received, and we will be trying to do all these questions, who initiates the trial in RecruitSource, and then do you go to the advocacy organization? Well, both will happen. The RecruitSource will be populated, back-ended by clinicaltrials.gov and then other clinical trial aggregators, including ones that aren't necessarily in clinicaltrials.gov, particularly the advocacy organizations themselves. So, for example, right now in clinicaltrials.gov there is one trial for pseudoxanthoma elasticum. That's the disease my children have in the organization I run. Well, I know there are actually 10 trials right now. So, in fact, all those trials would be in so that they could be alive and well, and the patients could look at which ones they might want to join. And I, as a leader, would be certainly pulling certain ones out and saying, here's a great trial for you to be involved in, much as Robert showed you with the first screen for KSNA.
Great. So is my screen showing with this to create a new paradigm?
Yes, and to the people who are asking questions, keep asking. We're going to keep aggregating, and Robert, go ahead.
And I've got there's probably about 3 minutes worth of content from here, and then we'll just focus on the questions. So we've shown you the use case around researchers and searching for subjects for clinical trials. That's our initial application of this, but from our perspective, where this builds is a lot bigger than just that one use case because of the tool set of the privacy rights filter. From the consumer's perspective, we're showing you the concept screen of what the consumer would ultimately build out in what we call their health universe in privacy layer. And over on the far right-hand side, you see clinical trials as one of the activities that this consumer is saying, my information can be shared with a specific clinical trial or a number of clinical researchers at their wishes. And then the other population of that health universe is family and friends, payers, employers, medical devices. There's lots of continuous monitoring devices that are now coming up that have data that exports from those devices wirelessly to a server that, I just saw IBM has a new offering for a device server that distributes that information onto your personal health record or over to your doctor. We would hope to have privacy layer installed to say, this is the specific doctor I want it to go to, this is the specific disease management organization I want that to go to, that information flow. Around the rest of the circle, pharmacies, the clinical trials, the hospitals, the facilities that the patient deals with, practitioners, and lifestyle and fitness is hidden behind the box there. But the idea is that the patient in this heads-up dashboard, as these various locations go to electronic technologies, and those technologies are CCHIT compliant in their technology for the audit standards that are recommended under the various interoperability standards, the patient would be able to see in a heads-up dashboard where their information is going and who's having access to it, and be able to have the capability that Mark showed you for dynamically consenting or reconsenting to that information flowing. So in this case, we're looking at a privacy concern that requires the attention of the health universe in this case for the flow of a record from a oncologist to a family member who's requested that record directly from the doctor's office, and the patient can either consent, which will let the doctor know or decline, in which case the doctor would know that they would be able to say, call the patient if you want to talk to them and persuade them to do something else. Sure.
I was just going to add to that one of the important elements of the system is the fact that in different layers we separate out the identifiable piece of the information about who the person is from the data itself, so individuals can have confidence that if they set their privacy directive in that first column around access to see my anonymous information, that's not synonymous with being able to see their identifiable information. So if they even want the results on their devices or otherwise to be seen by researchers who might identify them as a good candidate for a trial, the reality is the patient is always in control of who actually has access to their identifiable information.
And Robert, could you address right now, since it's pertinent, when is an informed consent obtained? We want to make that very clear, so could you reiterate that?
Whenever the patient says that they want to be informed to consent.
Great. I think what's unusual here and hard to see at first is that it's a dynamic informed consent and continues as the patients make decisions with their green and their red and their yellow buttons.
Yeah, it really is a different paradigm than what we've had before, because the technology doesn't exist today to do this. And so the patient, for a doctor's office to be calling patients and asking patients these kinds of questions is just virtually impossible. They would go bankrupt if they did it. For hospitals to do it would cause the hospital to only focus on getting the consents of patients. But as soon as the technology becomes enabling to allow them to do that with ease, there's a lot more use of the information that helps the patient that the patients would most patients at least would consent to, at least the patients I know that are in my organization would consent to, but that information is presently not being used for that manner because it's too hard to get that to happen. So we've built the technology in order to make that easy, in which case hopefully the data liquidity will start to flow and privacy will simultaneously be protected.
Robert, in light of the fact it looks like we have 7 minutes left, perhaps we go to potential opportunities and take some questions.
Yeah, so good point, and that is, from our perspective, there's a considerable number of different opportunities that we foresee in this technology, and I'll let the questions flow, Sharon.
Okay, great. So how far back in time does the audit log go? So in other words, does it go for months? Does it go till the research is over? How long can a person look at their audit log?
The vision is that there's a pull-down menu that allows the patient to screen how much they want to see of the audit log from the day they registered in privacy layer in perpetuity of use.
Great. If the researcher is paying, this can be problematic and costly for the NIH, and we've heard that a number of times from NIH. So can you address that?
All I can say is I've talked to a number of researchers and have talked about their research budgets and the line item in their budget for locating patients for trials, and the kinds of costs that we're talking about they view as minimal compared to what they're presently expending in resources and money to locate patients for trials, and then notwithstanding the delays that they're incurring as they wait for the patients to be accrued. So some of these researchers are trying to accrue patients over a period of years that we believe through this technology we can make happen in a matter of days or weeks. There's time value to money as well as the cost.
Super. This question says, how much thought have you given to the concept of anonymity? Your example search with constraints brought up a single individual with a lot of attributes, including health traits, city of residence, age, and gender. It seems that it would be easy for an insurer or employer or anyone else to reconstruct the identity from this info. It does not seem anonymous.
You want me to answer that, Robert?
Sure, go ahead.
The reality is the way the architecture is built, there is no way to drill down to lower than a 1 in 20,000 population, even if you did a zip code search. And the information, the contact information remains de-identified so that you just see the anonymous information. So there is no way to drill down and say, I'm looking for someone in a suburb of Des Moines, Iowa, that I know only has 200 people, and I want to find the one person with Alzheimer's and get their information. Our system would not allow someone to drill down to that level.
So let me also add one other thing, which is remember that this is an authenticated record seeker, so that insurance company would have had to fool our system into believing that they're a researcher, because this patient only made that information available to Dr. Geed. And so no one other than Dr. Geed in the whole world would be able to know that that information existed in the system if that was the consumer's wish.
Yep.
Great. If the patient has a question regarding clarification or doesn't understand something about the trial description, how do they get that information while preserving their privacy and anonymity?
They click on those buttons that were on that consent tool. There was 3 buttons. There was a green button to permit, to grant. There was a red button to deny, and then there was a yellow button that was to put it on hold, and they could enter into a discourse through the system with the researcher in an anonymous fashion. So they're contacting the researcher, and we're protecting their anonymity during that entire conversation.
Great. How can you identify unique patients in a given disease or with particular symptoms or treatments if all of these fields are free-form text entry instead of pull-downs?
Well, we use medical vocabulary, so the free-form text entry that you saw Mark enter in acetaminophen, because of I was watching at this end, because of the delay in the system, you didn't see that as he started typing in the first few letters, he actually got a prompt for was he headed towards a specific word that had that initial spelling that gave him recommendations of what he could select. And so, yes, we are doing free text, but we're also prompting through medical dictionaries, and then we have those same dictionaries being used to find similarities. So the concept of insulin might be correlated with the concept of diabetes, even if diabetes did not exist in the record.
Terrific. And in addition to that, the back-end registries that we're pulling from, so for example, Genetic Alliance Biobank is SNOMED and HL7 and all sorts of other controlled language compliant. So can you... As is
RecruitSource and
yeah.
PrivacyLinks.
Yep. One of the questions is, I assume this is an entirely online email-driven system, and then a related question is, so what format's used for the patient records? What about the records that are in doctors' offices that are paper, or are you planning on creating some kind of electronic system for those?
So it's not an entire, yes, what we've shown you is the entirely internet-based system. The system architecture, when fully built out, actually will go to cell phones and to interactive voice response systems for people that don't have an internet connection but are instead using a telephone to press the 1 key to grant consent, press the 2 key to deny, sort of thing. So the architecture is conceived to go beyond just someone that's sitting on a computer like we all are for this call. The records that are in the doctor's office in a paper form, those either get entered by virtue of the patient saying, I want to manually enter that information, or as the society moves towards more electronic records, the electronic records can be uploaded with the patient's consent to come into the system and be available through as indexed records. So that's the sort of the full build out of the architecture, is that as the record holders realize that their patients are giving them permission to share that information through privacy layer, that information becomes available, searchable, with the patient's consent for those people, or for access by those people who have the rights to see it.
Great. Are patients able to agree to consent to a study using this tool, or do they need to actually go in and follow an informed consent procedure and sign something? And related to that question, another person asked, how does the researcher demonstrate informed consent for their institutional's IRB? Is that the consent log, and are IRBs at academic institutions currently accepting this? Okay,
so there's about 5 questions in there. So the IRB process existed long before HIPAA. The IRB process has been used to assess the risk of allowing records to be viewed without the patient's consent. In this case, we're actually changing that paradigm, and we're not using the IRB process in order to to fulfill the requirements of privacy. Instead, we're using the patient's express consent to fulfill the requirements of privacy. By the same token, the patient is not consenting to participate in the trial. They're consenting for their information to be reviewed by the researcher. 2 very different concepts. We haven't done an adequate job yet of describing the risk of the trial, the contraindications, the possibilities that come in the safety portion of the IRB process. It's the traditional need for and application of IRB process. So if the researcher made contact with the patient and then was involved in enrolling the patient, they would go through the standard IRB process to inform the patient of the risk of participation and what to expect, and then give the patient the opportunity to consent or not. The consent you're seeing in our system is solely related to the privacy issues, not related to the safety issues.
Great. How do researchers or others, and there's a question about could the other be an advocacy group, for example, wanting to aggregate a cohort, how do they get authenticated, and is there a cost to an advocacy group that's trying to build a cohort using this system? So two questions. So first, how does the researcher get authenticated?
So we use a variety of methods for authenticating from I know this, it's already someone that's known to the system as being the real person, and they know someone to be that real person. And then there are out-of-wallet questions that are for fraud protection that are similar to use by e-commerce sites like Dell Computers and things like that, for banking sites, for proving that the person is indeed the person that they contend that they are. And then their subsequent revisits, or when they come back to the site, we use challenge questions and site keys, as you saw. If the system does not recognize the hardware that the person is coming from, then it presents more challenge questions and may require them to answer more identity verification questions to prevent against fraud. Mark, do you want to add to that, since you come from the fraud and identity solutions world?
I would just say that it's very similar to online banking for both creating an account and then authenticating the user when they come to log in. The added part around researchers being that there is added verification from that side, not just that the person is who they say they are, but that they are a legitimate researcher who should be accessing the system.
And we're actually registering the organization first, and then the researcher within the organization, and their research assistants underneath the researcher. So it gets more complicated, but in order to make it simple at the top level, the system behind this is quite complex.
Okay, and then Robert, what do you see in terms of if the advocacy organization wanted to register a researcher essentially was the advocacy group itself aggregating a cohort, would they be paying the same as a researcher would?
We haven't really thought about that case. I guess that would be subject for discussion. We're launching this with KSNA as our first client, and that's the organization that I chair. The focus that we have is focused on the researchers who are actually are already conducting trials that have been contacting me for years, trying to get me to help the organization to help fill out their cohorts, and we've done our best to help them over the years, and this is just a tool to make that easier and faster to do. And then we have a scientific conference coming up this summer where we have 23 researchers coming together, so part of the permissions we're going to present is not only for the research studies that are announced, but also for qualified researchers that we know have peer-reviewed journal articles relative to the condition, and that have the right credentials that see patients with our condition. And then if the consumer has lower privacy concerns in that lowered level, they would be encouraged, for someone who has lower privacy concerns and more interest in research, to participate or make their data available to those 23 researchers, hopefully enticing them to develop studies around that. So we really haven't focused on it from the organization itself being the researcher, although we're talking about making the data available to the organization so that the organization can be HIPAA compliant, because in the state of California, the new state regulations require organizations that hold personally identifiable health or medical information to comply with the equivalent of HIPAA security standards. And so we're sort of trying to build a capability for the organizations to meet a portion of their HIPAA compliance in those states like California through the use of privacy layer for their membership. But we really haven't focused on the use case that the question specifically asked about, and I guess it's something we'd consider as, something we need to develop around.
Yep. And then we'll do a couple more questions. I know we're over time, but there's only a few more, so I think if we have brief answers, we can do them. And then to everyone on the call, we will put this on our website as we do all of our webinars, so you would see the slides and also listen to the audio. So Robert, patients need a carrot to participate in medical research recruitment. There's often time and cost involved. The patient in your model has to input their medical records either via the EMR or the paper record, and do you have a marketing plan for this program to reach the public?
So Sharon, you can express your experience. Mine from KSNA's perspective is our members are incredibly motivated to see breakthroughs occur for the condition that affects themselves or their family members, and I believe they will take the time to raise their hand for research, provided there's no cost to them in doing so, and provided further that they know that their information is only available to those researchers that they're specifically saying that they are willing to make that information available to. We're not compensating the individuals. And I can go into depth about the philosophy behind why we're not compensating individuals, but by the same token, if they enroll in a study that does provide compensation for their time and cost, for instance, the study at the NIH that we used in our example contains 2 nights of lodging in Washington, D.C. and transit for 2 people accompanying a child to go to that trial, to go to that research study once a year. Actually, once every other year. My son is in that study. So there are means of compensation, but it's more at the enrollment level than it is at the raising your hand for interest level from our perspective.
Great, thank you. One more specific question, and then I'm going to give you a rather general question, and then we're going to end. That will leave one question that's complicated, and so we'll take that question up after. I'll connect you, Robert, and Mark with the asker. So the last specific question in the weeds is what happens when after a researcher is authenticated to assure that they are not misusing the information?
Well, the consent, the little box that was the dialog box that the researcher clicked in order to say I want to contact this person, that's actually a contract, and the contract includes that they will only use the information, we're licensing them the information, that they'll only use the information for the purposes that the patient wishes that information to be used as expressed in privacy layer. And so in addition to the violating the law perspective that would exist under the basic standards of if they acquired it for research purposes and then used it for marketing purposes, that wasn't the permission they got for it. In addition to whatever occurs under the law, they would be not abiding by the contract they entered into in terms of receiving the information in the first place.
And then I would add that the social network nature, especially in the disease communities, makes it very easy for this kind of word to get around. And the last set of questions, or 3 questions that really sort of all the same question from different angles, Robert and Mark, could you address your plans for scaling this up to a critical mass of users? What's the rollout plan? Is it already available? How long did it take you to bring it this far? Is it ready to use now? When will it be ready? So lots of questions about how it's going to go forward.
Well, Mark, I could spend an hour on that. Why don't you answer that one?
The answer is our initial go live is May 4th, and that is, as Robert mentioned, with the KSNA organization so that we can confirm that the system is functioning properly with a great user experience. And it's based upon alpha testing and some consumer acceptance testing that has been going on and continues to go on prior to that May 4th date. We will then be scaling out the application. As you can see, it has so many different applications and capabilities. So we will be expanding through Genetic Alliance partnership, through our our joint efforts with Genetic Alliance to roll this out to more than 100 of the organizations within Genetic Alliance to utilize it, and even beyond that, as you can see, the Health Universe and the parts that Robert described are very, very capable of connecting the privacy preferences to data and information wherever it might exist. So as that slide showed that Robert put up of opportunities, we are capable from the next weeks to the next months of partnering with not just advocacy groups, but other, let's say, health information holders to create dynamic privacy consent so that information can be utilized properly, and utilized effectively.
I guess the one thing I'd add is, having been at this conference with close to 30,000 of my closest friends in the health IT business for the last 4 days, with the economic stimulus package having placed such a focus on privacy that actually came as a surprise. The health IT industry lobbied against the privacy regulations in the bill. The Obama administration stuck to the House version of the legislation, which focused on privacy considerations, and so it's probably the most sweeping legislation relative to privacy since the adoption of HIPAA in the economic stimulus package. Well, now all of a sudden these vendors have to meet privacy considerations in order to access the economic stimulus dollars that are being discussed. So we thought we had a very slow absorption level because we were really in some ways swimming upstream from the rest of the industry in our privacy-related activity. And the answer to the question of how long have we been at it is, I filed the patent application that started this in February of 1997, so it's 12 years thus far. And the first shovel in the ground relative to private access was December of 2006, so that's going on 2.5 years. So we have somewhat of a lead in terms of the activity here. I think we conceptually have been focused on looking at privacy and how it works to provide privacy and access simultaneously longer than many people, most perhaps, and so now there's a lot of ramp-up possibilities for the kinds of use cases around health data exchange, the RIO systems, the regional health information organizations. There's just a myriad of opportunities for the application of this technology if it's made into a utility, as we've done.
Great, thanks. So Robert and Mark, I'm going to ask you the last 4 questions, and attendees, you're welcome to stay on the line if you don't have to rush out. So one of the questions was, a person missed the cost to researchers of accessing a potential participant, and can you repeat what that is?
Actually, I don't think that we said, and part of the reason we didn't say is we're still working on what that pricing is.
Okay.
But it's going to end up being around $400 for an enrolled party in a trial.
Okay.
And that compares to around $2,000 for the cost of getting an enrollment, average cost of enrollment currently.
Okay.
And of course, that begs the part about the speed as well, which obviously has a money component and cost component to it as well.
Right. Then this may be appropriate for rare diseases, but I do not see wide applicability to common diseases such as the heart disease in the adult. A patient is more inclined to go to clinicaltrials.gov directly if they are interested in participating in clinical trials. So basically, would you comment on your sense that this is also applicable or not to common diseases?
Well, I think the current paradigm for locating clinical trials, if you're a patient looking for clinical trials, is that it imposes on the patient the obligation of figuring out which trial is applicable to them. So if you go to heart disease and look for heart disease-related trials, my guess, I haven't done it. I mean, Mark, if you were in Trials Finder, you could do it real quickly. My guess is there's hundreds of trials for heart-related conditions. And within that context, the patient has a pretty substantial burden to try to figure out which trial is the best one for them, and they're not the right party to be making that decision. So what we've done is flipped the whole paradigm upside down by virtue of dealing with privacy properly, where we've said this could be a patient that could indeed raise their hand for one trial on clinicaltrials.gov, but could also say, you know, if there's a researcher who sees my medical history, my specific information, and says, I've got the perfect thing that I think you ought to be aware of, then the researcher, with the patient's permission, can reach out to the patient rather than vice versa, the patient reaching to the researcher. So it's really a paradigm shift, and you know, in a best case, someday we'll have I'm interested buttons next to the links on, well, next to the names of the trials on clinicaltrials.gov. From my perspective, and I've used that site, that's a hard way to do it, and it is not really getting good screening information available to the researcher. We're, I think, making it happen faster, better, and with better quality information flowing to the researcher to decide who they want to be in their trials for getting the best efficacy out of the work.
Great, thanks. And then just two more questions. Can you speak to the philosophy of your priority relative to rolling out the medical records part or the clinical trial searching, etc.? And the comment is, show me the money trail. So I'm not sure whether this is in regards to what do you see as the highest priority, medical records access or clinical trial searching, and therefore you must be investing more in one or the other.
No, that's actually not the case. The show me the money comment is, there's a lot of the privacy layer we believe will ultimately be a utility that is charged for in pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters charges to people that are trying to move records and that need to get authentication, authority, consent, audit trail, and a means of charging for that flow of that information. And so privacy layer is a utility with very, very low payments associated with it. We needed an application to run on top of privacy layer. This is the ultimate chicken and egg challenge, because if there's no information to be found, no searcher is going to search for very long using the search engine to say, well, every search that I do comes up with nothing. So you've got to simultaneously be populating the information that's findable as you're populating the people that are searching for it. On the other side of the equation, if you don't have a patient population that believes in the privacy protections, for the reason of one of the questions that was asked earlier in the session, the patient's not going to make their information available. And the question, if you recall, was, how do I know that the insurance company isn't going to see this information? It seems like it's awfully precise information. And I think the answer that was given was I know it's accurate, and that is, unless the insurance company is purporting to be Jay Geed, they wouldn't be seeing that information in the first place, because there's only one person on the planet, the authenticated Jay Geed, that gets to see that information. So, and Jay's a good friend. That's why I mentioned his name. But the bottom line is that we picked research as our go-to-market strategy for about three reasons. One is because we are dealing with patients who are very motivated, and we're simultaneously dealing with researchers who are very motivated. And in the early days of the system, it's going to work less well than as it's out to be more and more efficient. In the same way as a Wright Brothers flyer isn't as good as the 767 airplanes that we fly today. We're first-generation technology. It will get better over time, but we started with very motivated people on both sides of the equation, and we started with a transaction where the transaction requires patient consent, which is presently occurring through an IRB process that's really not what it was designed for initially. And so we started with a process that requires patient consent, and we started with a process where there's tremendous inefficiency in the system that's slowing down the speed of discoveries, and that's incurring incredible costs to human lives and to money in terms of the time and inefficiency of the system. as our go-to-market strategy. That's by no means an assessment that that's where the biggest amount of revenue is in the long term. It's a place to start, and I guess the one other variable was it's truly people that that as the chairman of an organization focused on the condition that my son has. I've a substantial percentage of my daily, of my everyday activity is focused in my nonprofit hat on disease advocacy and condition advocacy and patient advocacy, and I was looking for a way to sort of bring my for-profit and not-for-profit hats into a single activity because there weren't enough hours in the day to be splitting the loyalties. So it also had a practical implication in terms of doing what I wanted to do, which is to spend all the time I could focused on people who have the kind of condition that my son has, and he and others in similar circumstances with different conditions. I don't know, Mark, you want to answer any other part of that? Or?
That was quite thorough and great.
Great.
So actually you just received a very long answer to that, but I think the better thing, since this is now turning into a dialogue, would be to put the questioner in touch with you as long as it's okay with the questioner. In fact, we'll send her your email addresses and she can either set up a call or have a dialogue and email with you. Okay? So, thank you very much. We are really, really pleased with all that you presented, and we're very excited, of course, to continue working on this project with you guys. And we're very happy to have had all these questions and all this good due diligence from the community really helps the project and the product be much, much better. So thank you to everyone.
Yeah, and Sharon, if you do get people to call you.
Thank you.
If you get people call you, Sharon, make sure that you refer them over to us in terms of their suggestions and comments and criticisms. I mean, we're early enough in this that we can make changes. So let's get the best social networking benefit of this we possibly can to make the product as good as it can possibly be.
Sure, and actually just one last comment. So the person who had another comment said she just recommends we add clinical researchers to our board. And you might want to mention that in fact we do have a number of those involved.
Oh, absolutely. And Ron Good was head of clinical research for Pfizer for a number of years. So we actually have researchers on our board. We have doctors on our board, but the intent of the company is to build out that advisory board so that we actually have different disciplines where we have multiple members from each of the disciplines. We just bring together a convergence of so many different activities that the board would get too big and unwieldy if we tried to have multiple members from each of the constituencies.
Super. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.